Hello, I'm Doug Musio. This is City Talk. It's now New York City's 150 acres of an island off Manhattan's southern tip. Joe Louis took his Army physical there, and it's the birthplace of the Smothers Brothers. She covers the waterfront. She's the floating pool lady. She's a city planner, urban historian, and longtime parks advocate and activist. It's Governor's Island, and she's Ann Buttenweiser, and she's produced a wonderful new book, Governor's Island, The Jewel of New York Harbor. Ann is the president of the Neptune Foundation and adjunct professor at Columbia University. On July 4th, 2007, she opened the nation's only floating swimming pool on the industrial waterfront in Brooklyn. She is also the author of Manhattan Waterbound, Manhattan's Waterfront from the 17th Century to the Present, now in its second edition, as well as written articles on urban history and planning. She is on the boards of New Yorkers for Parks and the Skyscraper Museum, among others. In 2009, she was appointed to the Board of Governors Island Preservation and Education Association. Welcome, Ann.
Thank you. Glad to be here.
The last time we really talked was 30 years ago. You were on the board of the Parks Council, and I was the chief of staff for a city councilman. And you were doing parks work for a decade before that. How did you become so involved in parks that you become Ms. Parks, if you will?
Well, I wouldn't say I'm Ms. Parks, but I will say I got involved because of my children. I had 4 children, very small, growing up in the city playgrounds, and they needed to play there, but they also were getting hurt because there were slides and there were swings, and there was concrete under the slides and the swings.
Forest Hill, Forest Park, 76th Street in Jamaica Avenue. I still have scabs from falling, and the seesaws as well. So you did what?
Exactly.
So, your kids are getting scraped and bumped and bruised.
Came across another friend who was interested in this, a woman by the name of Adele Auchincloss, who was a founder of another parks organization called the Park Association. And she and I did some research, found out from Lenox Hill Hospital how many children were getting hurt. And
lots of them.
Discovered that there was something that Minnesota Mining was making, a rubber surfacing, which we now know as safety surf.
And which is all over. It's universal.
And which is all over. And we raised $50,000, which would cover 2 playgrounds, one in the 70s and one in 85th Street. And we brought this money to the Parks Department and said, here, put this down. And they said, what? 5 years later, it got put down and was put into the city budget.
You must have, and I know you have, confronted city, state, and indeed federal bureaucracies. How did you, in a sense, you didn't fight City Hall as well as cajoled and, in a sense, led them to the water in this particular case?
Well, in that case, but the other thing I did was I joined City Hall. I worked in city government for many, many, many years. And that gave me, I found out who was where and what people's beliefs were and what the political beliefs were.
When did you start working for the city?
In 1984.
And you worked where?
I started out at city planning. Then I went to the...
Now wait, and when you were at city planning, you worked on waterfront issues,
They had
in
a
fact.
waterfront division that had just started, and that's where I was, yes. And I did a study for them. I had a great job. I went around the country, visited all of the wonderful waterfronts that existed in the United States.
Nice.
And we didn't have that.
This is work?
That was play.
Right.
Was
I mean, this
pleasure.
is like you being a professor. I know my
Yeah,
professor colleagues will be mad at me, but this is fun.
This
So
is fun.
you did all this traveling,
Right.
and it resulted in what?
Well, I did a booklet for city planning to show developers and architects that what really could be done. So that was just the very beginning of my proselytizing of for the recreational waterfront.
Well, and you are a proselytizer. You are an activist and an advocate, and you are a tireless promoter of the parks.
The parks and the waterfront, yes.
Talk about the waterfront as a place for you. What does the waterfront mean to you, and what ought it to mean to the rest of us?
Well, this is an island city, or it's a city of islands, and what just amazed me in the 1970s, 1980s, was that no one knew that these were islands and that there was water. And my whole thrust in that first book, in The Floating Pool, was to introduce New Yorkers to their waterfront.
It's really pretty amazing. I mean, I grew up in Queens, and we used to hitchhike down Cross Bay Boulevard to the Rockaways, and we were there every day. So we, and as kids, enjoyed the ocean. And now I live in northern New Jersey. It takes me an hour and a half to go to the Jersey Shore, and the Jersey Shore just doesn't have it. But also, I mean, let me rant and rave, since I'm, I am a New Yorker. When you go over the Cross Island Parkway, drive along the Cross Island Parkway, and you go over the Throgs Neck Bridge, you look out, and there's Long Island Sound with all these sailboats. You never would know that you were in the city. Where else? Where would you go? Take me on a tour of the waterfront right now. Where should I go? What should I look at?
Well, right now, I would say come look at some of the new things that are happening on the waterfront. Walk the Hudson River Park from 72nd Street to Battery Park.
Unbelievable.
I mean, incredible.
Unbelievable.
Just incredible. Go to Brooklyn Bridge Park, which is only partly open, but it is just the most amazing new park, new design, bringing people to the water. There's environmental things that have been happening there. They collect the rainwater in these big barrels that are underground, and that rainwater will be used to sprinkle to water the park in the dry seasons.
Where else?
Go to Governor's Island.
Okay, let's go
Did I set you up for that?
Yes, that was perfect. Thank you very much. Let's go to Governor's Island. Give us a capsule history of the place. It's absolutely fascinating, the 200-year-plus history of the place, and particularly its current and future manifestation. Give us a little sense of the place.
Well, it actually goes back to 1624 when the Dutch first arrived, because they actually came to Governor's Island. And they were there for a few days. There were, I think, about 8 men. And then they moved over to Manhattan, and they left their cattle on the island, except that wasn't very good because there were nut trees and no grass. So eventually the Dutch actually settled on there a bit. And then it became the summer playground of the governors of New York. Hence, and those were then
the royal governors.
The royal governors. Hence the name Governor's Island, Governor's apostrophe S, and it lost the apostrophe over time. In 1800, it was now owned by the federal government. No, sorry, by the state, and it was turned over to the federal government for use by the Army. And the Army created a base there.
And then the Army was there for?
1965.
And then it had turned over at one point to the Coast Guard.
Coast Guard took it over in 1965,
right.
And they were there till 1995.
And then they left.
They left.
And what was there?
There was an island with some apartment houses, the wonderful historic structures. You've got a Castle Williams, and you also have Fort Jay. And it just those were built in the early 1800s, yes. And then you've got a Victorian village, which Nolan Park, which is absolutely delightful. These wonderful wooden houses, with each one with a porch. And then you've got ball fields that are out there that people still go to and use. And then you've got views that are
unbelievable,
out of this world.
So, I mean, it is what, a couple of 100 yards south of the southern tip?
4 minutes from Manhattan, or 8 minutes from Manhattan, and 2 minutes from Brooklyn.
How do you get there? You got to go by boat.
By boat.
Is there any way that you could do over land or underwater, but it's got to be by boat.
Right now, it's by boat. The Battery Maritime Tunnel passes right by the island, but there's no outlet.
Okay. Now, what can we expect on this island? I mean, as a matter of fact, on the April 11th, the state of New York, it was turned over to the state in what, 2003 by the feds?
It was turned over to the state and the city.
Okay.
President Clinton gave it to the state and the city for $1, with an agreement that there should be 40 acres of parkland and no housing and no casinos.
Now, wait a second. Didn't Rudy Giuliani didn't he have some kind of task force that proposed that we have casinos on Governor's Island?
Yes.
And this was a specific rejection of that proposal.
Correct.
Why?
I don't really recall the reason for that.
Okay. So, sell me on Governor's Island, why I should go.
Oh, you go out there and you can, on a Friday, you get a free bike, and you can bike around the 2.2 mile perimeter of the island.
So the whole perimeter is
The
accessible
whole
by
perimeter is now
the
that.
views of Lower Manhattan and the Statue of Liberty are astounding.
You go south, and all of a sudden you stop, and first of all, there's a garden that's being grown there with vegetables, which in fact were being sold at the end of the summer because it was so successful. I think the Governor's Island blog says that the White House is the most the most politically correct garden, and this is the garden that has the best view in the country.
Wow, wow!
So
Do you get to see the Verrazano? You must be able to look up and see the Verrazano Bridge at some point.
Yes, you can see the Verrazano, you can see Staten Island, you can see Brooklyn,
Wow.
but the main thing is when you were at the tip of that island, you were virtually touching Lady Liberty, and you don't look at anything else.
Now, there is a certain proportion of the island is reserved for commercial development. What can we expect that will be there? Are we going to have these view-busting reresidential and commercial facilities?
Well, you're certainly not going to have the residential facilities because that's not
it's
allowed.
precluded.
And there's certainly there are agreements with the federal government and National Park Service that no structures can be any taller than the castle. So it's going to be low-rise, whatever it is. Land has been set aside both on Buttermilk Channel and on the Hudson, on the Hudson side of it, of the island, and that development will come in time. At the moment, there is talk about NYU being interested in expanding over there. And I fully believe that as the parkland gets built out and as we have the Harbor School that's going to open in the fall, we also have a artist's residence that's there now, which will be year-round. And you get these activities that start there that people are going to, developers in some form, commercial developers, will be interested in coming there.
Big question that I have is, does the city have the resources both for the capital construction and demolition, as well as the tens of millions of dollars I presume it will take to maintain these properties? What is the fiscal situation here?
Well, let's talk about capital first,
Go
because
ahead.
we're talking about the announcement that the mayor made was that they were going to start building the park, or at least finishing the designs for it and building it. There is money in the state budget which is going to be transferred over, that's left over from capital funds that was originally
And we will
set
get
out.
that money. It's
We're
not going to
gonna-
go into the
No.
state's operating budget.
Correct, and so that's going to be about 80 million altogether, which will be enough to do the structural drawings first for the entire park, and it will also be enough to build out the beginnings of the park. So the esplanade will be completed, it will be resurfaced, it will get railings, and it will have trees. And then the northern part of the park, which is just the area south of Liggett Hall, which is kind of the dividing line between the landfill and the original island, the park will be built, garden, and perhaps the hammock park.
But it
The
all
hammock
depends on the city's fiscal situation and the willingness of the city to put money into this, obviously.
Well, the part of this money, of the 62 million, the city has committed to.
Okay. And it's there.
It's there.
Okay,
yeah.
so that's going to happen. You mentioned landfill. One of the interesting things about Governor's Island, as well as Manhattan Island, is that out of the 172 acres, 102 of them are landfill. And I was surprised to learn that it was landfill from the Lexington Avenue subway. So we've got Governor's Island, with subway excavation. We've got Battery Park City with World Trade Center excavation. I was looking at old maps. Southern part of Manhattan, about a quarter of it didn't exist when the Dutch landed in 1624.
Correct. 1/3 of Lower Manhattan is landfill. The Governor's Island landfill is the biggest. It is, Battery Park City was about 90 acres. Governor's Island was 103. And it was, very, very difficult to do that. When Battery Park City was done, you had the equipment to be able to blow the dirt in from the waterway, and you also had the building of the World Trade Center right next door. So you just dumped it. Can you imagine bringing all of this stuff over to Governor's Island?
And then creating what will be the last developed piece of real estate in the city. Okay, let's go to the floating pools because I found that utterly fantastic. How did you become the floating pool lady? What led to this innovation in urban service delivery, if you will?
Well, just the name floating pool lady goes back to we used the word proselytizing. I found out about the floating pools doing research for my dissertation at Columbia.
Dissertations are wonderful things.
Just
Painful.
And I was in the bowels of the Battery Maritime Building, which is now the place that you go to get the ferry to go to Governor's Island.
Okay.
And at that time, it housed and I think it still does, the Department of Transportation.
I believe
and they
so.
still have some offices there. And they had all of the files there from the old dock department that went back to 1880.
And you're loving this.
And I'm loving this because I'm writing a dissertation on the history of New York City's waterfront. And all of a sudden I come across these papers that say, floating baths, open the floating baths, close the floating baths. And I discovered, but going through these files, that at one time there were 15 floating pools in the city.
And this is what, turn of the 18th, 19th
first
to the 20th
ones,
century?
well, actually, there were 2 that were run by a dentist at the end of Battery Park. That it was in 1882.
Okay.
1832 were the first.
Early.
Then
Really
Boss Tweed opened 6 of them in 1880.
So another feather in Tweed's cap. Tweed gets a bad name, but the boss did some really good stuff. Now, what was the political motivation for the dentist and the economic motivation and the boss?
The dentist was a health thing. There was a belief that the salt air was curative. So you came down there and you paid and you got a cure.
Okay.
It's like going to a spa.
Okay.
The Boss Tweed one, I would say, and this is off the top of my head, it was crowd control. These were put in tenement districts. These were people who were living with no running water, no bathrooms, and this was a place for them to go and take a bath and get clean.
So there was a sort of public order and public hygiene element to
Yes.
this. Now, after reading all the scholarship, if you will, and the writing on this, they used to pump river water into the hulls of the boats, and then
No, they were rectangular structures. They were on pontoons.
Okay.
And there were slats on the bottom.
Okay.
And the water was just river water.
Right.
Until one day the health department decided, well, they ought to test this out. And so they put red dye into a sewer on the Lower East Side. And it ended up in a floating pool down at the Battery.
Not very hygienic.
They closed the pools.
And they do this when?
This is 1915.
Okay, then you're nosing around in the archives and you say, aha, you have, the light bulb moment.
Yes.
And what happens?
I wrote an article, an op-ed piece on this for the New York Times, and they published it on a Memorial Day weekend in 1980.
Nice timing, nice place.
Yes, perfect, with a Jacob Riis photograph of one of these pools.
Nice.
And I said, okay, if the New York Times thinks it's a good idea, I think I ought to do it. But I was working for the city at the time, and it took me a long time till I had my own free time. And my husband, when I quit my last job, said to me, "What are you going to do?" And I said, "I'm going to build a floating swimming pool." And he said, "Go to it."
And you did.
And I did.
And sort of walk us through the travails of getting this pool actually in the water and people in it.
We bought a barge.
Now, who's we?
Sorry, I created the Neptune Foundation, which is a not-for-profit, and its goal was to create 3 prototype floating swimming pools to serve recreationally underserved areas of the city. So there was a particular...
Okay, so you've got the idea. Where do you go?
Where do I go? I go to an architect to design the dressing rooms and the sort of the finery of the floating pool.
Right.
And I go to a naval architect to find me a boat and also to figure out how to make a hole in that boat and put the pool in.
Now, wait a second. You're not going to people for money?
Well, I'm also doing that.
So what's the pitch? Who are you going to and what's the pitch?
Well, I'm going to friends, and also I was...
Nice friends.
Yes. There was one wonderful woman who left us a legacy, which was a big start for it.
So you pay for the design, you're looking for the barge. What's the nature of your involvement with city government at this time?
At that time, I was out.
And what about the relationship of the pool to city government, or the idea of the
idea is I
pools?
went to Henry Stern and said, I want to bring one of these, build one of these.
And you go back with Henry a long time?
A long time.
Oh.
Long time.
This is
starting with the parks things. And I said, I'm going to bring it to New York. Would you take it? He said, yes, I'll take it, but I won't maintain it. Well, Neptune was not in the business to maintain a pool. So anyway, I went ahead and I built it. I did not have a place to bring it. I did not have, by that time, Adrian Benepe had become commissioner, and he said, yes, I will take it. But he wasn't ready to take it by the time the pool was finished, which was in 1996. I decided I have to bring it up because once it's here, people...
And where is it now? It's in Louisiana.
Louisiana.
And at one point, it almost takes it in Hurricane Katrina. It's down there.
Yes, correct.
Okay. So this is a tough time for you.
5-month delay
This
of
is
finishing this thing, yes. Bring it to New York on Halloween.
Perfect.
And it comes into the harbor. I mean, it was just welcomed by everybody. The state said, okay, you can, went to the state, the Brooklyn piers were closed, and said, can I just berth it there for the winter so that we can finish the work? We had to build a roof, we had to put in the pavers, we had to put in the pool equipment, etc. Okay, but they weren't ready to take me that day because I didn't have the proper insurance.
You got it. Come on, what's wrong with you?
So, I don't know, do you remember the garbage barge that went
Absolutely.
up and down? Well, that's what this was.
The garbage barge went throughout the eastern seaboard and into the, southern part of the United States, the Gulf of Mexico.
Well, instead of going to the Brooklyn piers, this pool went to Staten Island, where it couldn't be moved because all of the tugboats were trying to get the Intrepid out of its berth on the west side.
So when does this actually birth, and when do real New Yorkers get into this pool?
Well, it birthed in about, this is middle of November, about 2 weeks, middle of November 1996, and the pool opened a 1.5 block south, also on the Brooklyn piers, on July 4th, 1997.
Nice. Very nice. And where is it now?
Sorry, 2007.
2007.
It's all we're there.
You're a decade off. That's okay. That's fine.
2006, 2007.
Where is it now?
It is now, actually, it's out in Huntington, Long Island, where it was stored for the winter, and it will open once again at Barretto Point Park in the South Bronx.
And it's drawn tens of thousands of people a year.
We had 50,000 the first year in Brooklyn, and last summer, if you recall, it rained and was cold all of July. 40,000 people used it in the South Bronx. Let me just tell you something about that South Bronx community.
Go.
This is the most impoverished recreational community in the city. It also has the highest asthma rate. And there's a large amount of obesity in this among the children here. So this is an incredible resource for them to go and have exercise and to be on the water.
Right. I mean, the waterfront for not only the elites and, the upper socioeconomic classes, but for the rest of us, if you will. What's up? What's next on tap for you?
Well, the past several months I've been selling my book, giving
Hey,
lectures
listen,
on that.
this is a good thing to do. You having fun?
Yes,
You enjoy selling the book?
I do, yes.
What do you like best about the conversation surrounding the book? What vibes do you get from people who both read the book and sort of have lived part of the history that you talk about?
The wonderful thing are some of the people who wrote to me, emailed me, spoke to me on the telephone as I was putting together this book. And I've made several really good friends out of this. There's a woman whose father was stationed on the island, and there were 5 children, and her story of the apartment living there and how they did not have lodging for large families at that time. There's also a woman who was the teacher at the school, which actually got torn down last summer. And she shared with me some of the pictures that the children had drawn, and one of them is in the book.
Right. Very nice. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much for having me here.
My thanks to Ann Buttenweiser, author of Governor's Island, The Jewel of New York Harbor. She's an urban historian and longtime parks advocate, for being on the show. Next week, we'll chat with National Book Award winner Colin McCann, author of Let the Great World Spin. See you next week. Hello, I'm Doug Musio. Let us know what you think about this show. You can reach us at CUNY.TV. When you get there, click on the bar that says Contact Us and send your email. Whatever it is. Thanks, no thanks, obnoxious, do it. Send it.